coffee cup sat in front of me like a loaded gun. Even now, remembering that moment makes my skin crawl. I should have known something was wrong. The instant Alexander slid it toward me with that polished smile of his, the same smile he used when he belittled my accomplishments. When he told me my promotion was just luck. When he assured everyone I was overreacting to months of unexplained illness. That smile had become his mask. And behind it I was starting to see cracks. But that morning, it wasn't just the smile that unsettled me. It was the smell. Sweet, almost inviting, but beneath it lurked a sharp, chemical undertone. Bitter almonds. The scent was faint but distinct, and my mind pulled back a memory from 15 years ago in college chemistry class, when the professor had lectured about cyanide. Not everyone could detect it, he'd said, but some carried a genetic trait that gave them the ability. I was one of the unlucky, or perhaps, in this case, lucky few. Drink up. Honey, Alexander said lightly, settling across the table. His tone dripped with fake warmth. Between us sat his mother, Eleanor, her lips pursed into their familiar mask of disapproval. She had been living under our roof for 6 months since breaking her hip, a wound that had healed long ago. Yet she stayed, a constant presence hovering like a warden. "It's getting cold," Eleanor chimed in, her voice sharp as glass. "Alexander went to such trouble to make it special for you." I lifted the cup, tilting it toward my lips, but didn't drink. Instead, I studied my husband's eyes too bright, too fixed on my mouth. His hands pressed flat against the table, knuckles white. "I need to use the bathroom," I muttered, pushing back my chair before either of them could object. His expression flickered panic, maybe disappointment. I locked the bathroom door and leaned over the sink, staring at my reflection. My face looked pale, hollowed out. Over the past few months, I had lost weight I hadn't meant to lose. Endured constant nausea. Exhaustion that no amount of sleep could shake. 3 months ago, I'd been hospitalized with violent vomiting. The doctors had shrugged, calling it food poisoning. But I remembered too well that it happened just after I was promoted to senior partner at the law firm, the same position Alexander had been passed over for twice. I splashed cold water on my face, my pulse pounding as puzzle pieces began clicking into place. The odd receipt I'd found in his wallet weeks earlier from a chemical supplier he claimed was for photography supplies. The way Eleanor rifled through my laptop when she thought I wasn't watching. Their hushed whispers at night, cut off when I entered the room. The way Alexander's smile had grown thinner, tighter, each time my career advanced while his stagnated. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't stress. They were poisoning me. When I returned to the dining table, both Alexander and Eleanor snapped their heads up from their quiet conversation. His smile widened, hers thinned. "Everything all right?" he asked too smoothly. "Perfect," I said, sitting back down, hiding the tremor in my hands. I lifted the cup again, but this time, I already had a plan. "Eleanor, you look tired," I said gently. "Would you like some coffee?" Alexander made plenty. "Oh, I shouldn't," she began, though her eyes betrayed her longing. She adored coffee, yet he rarely made it for her. "I insist," I said, rising. My heart pounded as I fetched another mug from the kitchen. I poured fresh coffee from the same pot Alexander had used, but this one smelled normal. Clean. Just coffee. I carried it back and set it before her. Then, in one smooth motion, I switched my cup with hers under the pretense of adjusting my napkin. "There you go," I said, forcing a smile, Her face softened into genuine pleasure. Thank you, dear Alexander. You should do this more often. I picked up my new cup and sipped. Coffee. Nothing more. Across from me, Alexander's expression hardened into something I'd never seen before. Raw, unmasked hatred. Anna, he said slowly, why don't you drink yours? You said you were tired. I am tired, I murmured, taking another sip of Eleanor's harmless brew. This is wonderful. Eleanor, meanwhile, was drinking deeply from the cup meant for me. Within 15 minutes, her hand began to tremble. She clutched the table, her face flushed, breath coming short. I don't feel well, she gasped. What's wrong? I asked, leaning forward with feigned concern as Alexander turned ghostly pale. Mom, how much did you drink? He demanded. Most of it, she choked, before convulsing violently, the chair crashing as she toppled to the floor. No, Alexander dropped to his knees beside her, horror twisting his features. You weren't supposed to drink that. His words fell into the air like a confession. I stood, pulling my phone calmly from my pocket. I'm calling 911. He seized my arm, grip like iron. Anna, wait, you don't understand. I understand perfectly, I said, shaking him off. My voice was steel. You've been poisoning me for months. Small doses. Just enough to make me sick. Just enough to make me look unstable. But this time you made it lethal. Alexander's face drained of color, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. He looked at me, then at his mother writhing on the floor, and I knew with chilling clarity he hadn't expected me to survive this morning. He'd been certain enough to risk everything. Eleanor's body jerked violently, a guttural sound escaping her throat. Foam gathered at the corners of her lips, her eyes rolling back. My own heart hammered, not from pity, but from the grim recognition that she was tasting the suffering she had helped inflict on me for months. I knelt beside her, phone in hand, dialing emergency services, speaking in calm, clipped words. Female, mid-60s. Severe convulsions. Possible poisoning. Send an ambulance immediately. Alexander clutched at my wrist. Stop this. Don't tell them that his voice cracked. Half command, half plea. I yanked my arm free. You think they won't figure it out. She's dying. Alexander. And so was I. Did you think I wouldn't notice? Did you think I was blind? He lunged toward the coffee cups, grabbing both, but I intercepted him, slamming my hand down on his Prady. Don't you dare destroy the evidence. My eyes bore into his, and for the first time, he looked small, cornered. Minutes stretched like hours until the sirens wailed outside. Paramedics stormed the house, rushing Eleanor onto a stretcher, their faces grim as they administered oxygen and checked her pulse. They asked questions, rapid and sharp. What happened? What was in the coffee? Who brewed it? I looked at Alexander. His lips moved, but no sound came. He wanted me to lie, to protect him. Instead, I said clearly, my husband made the coffee. It smelled strange. I believe it was poisoned. Every head in the room snapped toward him. His mask slipped entirely, rage and desperation warring on his face. Anna, how can you say that? You're my wife. Wife. The word felt like acid on my tongue. A wife you wanted out of the way so you could claim everything I built. I worked for years to get where I am. Alexander. And instead of standing beside me, you chose to try and destroy me. The paramedics exchanged glances, one quietly making a note. Police would follow. I knew it in my bones. When they carried Eleanor out, Alexander staggered into the hallway, his hands gripping his hair. You've ruined us. Do you understand if she dies? It's over. Everything's over. I followed, my voice steady, though my legs trembled. No, Alexander. You ruined us the moment you put poison in my cup. He spun toward me, eyes wild. I only wanted… what? My career, my money, to make me weak enough that I'd quit, stay home, and let you feel like the man again. My voice cracked with fury. You could have chosen to love me, to be proud of me. But you let envy rot you until there was nothing left. He slumped against the wall, defeated, his shoulders shaking with sobs that sounded more like rage than regret. For years, I had bent myself into shapes trying to please this man, to prove my worth. And now, standing there watching him unravel, I felt a strange, terrible calm. The police arrived within the hour. Questions flew. Evidence was bagged. The poison mug sealed away. Alexander tried to spin a story, claimed Eleanor must have added something herself. That I was hysterical. That I'd been imagining sickness for months. But the officers listened carefully when I told them about the hospital visits, the receipts, the way the coffee smelled. And when I showed them the small notebook I had started keeping documenting every symptom, every time Alexander brewed my drink, every time Eleanor encouraged me to finish the cup, their expressions hardened. One officer murmured, "You were smart to keep this." Smart. No one had called me that in months. Not Alexander, who sneered at every success. Not Eleanor, who treated me like an intruder in my own home. But I had been smart. And patient. And now the truth was finally clawing its way to the surface. That night, after they took Alexander away for questioning, I sat alone in the silence of my house. The cup was gone, the evidence in their hands. Eleanor was in critical care, her survival uncertain. And me, I was alive. Shaken, bruised in ways no one could see but alive. And for the first time in years, I felt something blooming in my chest where fear used to live. Freedom. But freedom, I knew, came with a price. This was only the beginning. The house was unbearably quiet after they took Alexander away. For years, silence had been something I craved. Silence from his cutting remarks, from Eleanor's constant criticism, but now it pressed down like a weight. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant hum of the refrigerator reminded me that I was alone in the wreckage of a marriage that had nearly cost me my life. I walked through the kitchen, my eyes falling on the empty space where the coffee cups had been. How many times had I trusted him with something so simple? How many mornings had I sipped from a mug he handed me, believing it was an act of love, when in reality it was a dose of slow death? My stomach twisted, remembering the months of nausea, the hospital stay, the unexplained weakness. It hadn't been in my head. It hadn't been stress. It had been him. My husband, the man I had once promised forever. A sharp knock on the door startled me. For a split second, panic clawed at my chest had he come back. But when I opened it, 2 detectives stood there, their expressions grave but not unkind. Mrs. Carter, the taller one said, "We'll need you to come down to the station tomorrow to make a full statement." We're also sending the contents of the coffee for toxicology. Your testimony, along with your notebook, will be critical. Critical. The word echoed. My story wasn't just mine anymore, it was evidence. A lifeline, not only for me but for anyone else who might have fallen prey to their schemes. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the look on Alexander's face when Eleanor began convulsing. Shock. Yes, but not the shock of a man who'd accidentally harmed his mother. It was the shock of a man whose plan had failed. He hadn't cared about her. He hadn't cared about me. He had cared only about control. I thought back to the early days of our marriage, when his laughter had been genuine, when he used to bring me flowers for no reason. Was that man ever real, or had I been blind, seeing what I wanted to see while the darkness grew quietly behind his smile? The next morning, at the station, the questions came like arrows. How long had I suspected? Why hadn't I come forward sooner? What proof did I have I explained everything the hospital stays? The receipts. The odd smell of the coffee. The way Eleanor had encouraged me to drink every drop. I told them about my promotion, about Alexander's resentment, about the slow unraveling of our marriage. One detective leaned forward. You realize, Mrs. Carter, if the toxicology confirms cyanide or a similar substance, this could be attempted murder. Attempted murder. The words landed like a stone in my chest. Not paranoia. Not stress. Murder. When they finally let me leave, I sat in my car, hands gripping the steering wheel, staring at the world outside. Strangers passed on the sidewalk, laughing, sipping their coffees, living in innocence. None of them could see the storm I carried inside me. None of them knew how close I had come to being another obituary, another mystery headline. A week later, the call came. The toxicology confirmed cyanide. Alexander was officially charged. Eleanor, still in the hospital, had survived but barely. She refused to speak to me, sending word through a nurse that I was a snake who had tricked her. Even on the brink of death, she clung to her cruelty. And Alexander, his lawyer, reached out, begging for leniency, claiming he had acted out of emotional distress. Distress. As though envy justified poisoning his wife. As though being overshadowed excused attempted murder. I hung up the phone and laughed. A bitter, hollow laugh that echoed in the empty house. For the first time, I felt no guilt. No pity. Only clarity. I had survived their venom. Now it was my turn to decide what came next. Court was not like the movies. It wasn't fiery speeches or sudden gasps from the gallery. It was paperwork, long testimonies, and the steady ticking of time as every detail of my life was laid bare. Still, the gravity of it weighed on me. Sitting there, across from Alexander, I saw not the man I once loved but the architect of my suffering. His suit was pressed, his expression carefully arranged into wounded innocence. But I saw the twitch of his jaw, the cold flicker in his eyes when he thought no one was watching. Eleanor sat in a wheelchair at his side, her skin sallow from her hospital stay, eyes sharp with the same contempt she'd always shown me. Even nearly killed by the scheme, she refused to see me as anything but the enemy. It was almost laughable, her loyalty to the son who had poisoned her by accident. Her hatred for the woman who had saved her life by switching the cups. The prosecutor laid out the evidence methodically, the toxicology report, the receipts from the chemical supplier, my hospital records, my detailed notebook. Piece by piece, they built the story of a man whose jealousy curdled into violence, aided by a mother whose disdain fueled his resolve. When I took the stand, my hands shook, but my voice did not. I spoke of the months of sickness, the whispers I overheard, the fear that had crept into my bones each time Alexander set a mug in front of me. I told them about the morning of the switch, how the smell of bitter almonds had jolted me awake to the reality I had tried so hard to deny. I described Eleanor's collapse, Alexander's frantic confession, and the sickening realization that I had been living with two people who would rather see me dead than see me succeed. The defense tried to paint me as dramatic, paranoid, manipulativa. They pointed to Eleanor's accusation that I tricked her into drinking the poisoned coffee. They suggested I had orchestrated the whole thing to rid myself of an unwanted mother-in-law. But the evidence was undeniable, and the jury could see what I already knew: Alexander's mask had cracked. During cross-examination, Alexander looked at me with something almost pleading in his eyes. "Anna," he said, his voice low, "you know I never wanted to hurt you. You have to believe that." I held his gaze, steady and cold. "I don't have to believe anything anymore." The verdict came swift and final: guilty of attempted murder. Eleanor's cries echoed through the courtroom, her hand clutching her son's as if she could shield him from justice. But nothing could shield him now. He was led away in handcuffs, his eyes still locked on mine, burning with hatred that once would have broken me. Now, it only made me stronger. Walking out of that courthouse, the weight I had carried for so long began to lift. The whispers in my head quieted. The fear that had shadowed every cup of coffee, every meal, every moment of sleep finally began to loosen its grip. I was scarred, yes, but I was free. I moved out of the house within a month, selling it to strangers who would never know the poison that once seeped into its walls. I found a small apartment downtown, modest but bright, filled with sunlight and silence that felt like peace rather than punishment. I bought my own coffee maker, brewing cups each morning that smelled of nothing but safety. Sometimes, I'd catch myself staring out the window, remembering the woman I used to be, the one who doubted her instincts, who bent herself smaller to fit into a marriage that was shrinking her soul. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone fiercer, sharper, forged by fire and betrayal into something unbreakable. I didn't just survive them. I became someone they could never destroy. Months rolled by, and with every sunrise I felt myself shedding the weight of the past. Healing wasn't linear. There were nights I woke drenched in sweat, the ghost of that bitter almond scent choking my lungs. And nights I replayed Eleanor's collapse on the kitchen floor and Alexander's wild-eyed desperation. But slowly, the memories lost their claws. Slowly, I began to live again. At work, colleagues whispered at first, unsure of what to say. The news had spread: lawyer poisoned by her own husband, the kind of headline that breeds fascination and pity in equal measure. But I refused to shrink beneath it. I showed up, head high, case files in hand, and let my victories in the courtroom speak louder than the gossip. Before long, the whispers turned into respect. Clients came to me not only for my expertise but for my resilience, my refusal to break. One evening, after a particularly grueling trial, a young associate lingered by my office door. "I read about what happened," she said hesitantly. "And I just wanted to say, you give me hope. I've been in something, not the same, but bad. And seeing you, it makes me think I can get out." Her words pierced me deeper than any verdict. I realized then that my survival wasn't just mine. It was a torch I could pass to others. Eleanor faded from my life entirely. She refused my calls. Not that I made many. And from what little I heard, she had moved in with a cousin across state lines. still loyal to the son who had nearly killed her, still blaming me for exposing the truth. Some people, I learned, it would rather choke on lies than breathe in freedom. As for Alexander, his letters began arriving from prison. At first, they were apologies, hollow, trembling words about regret and temporary madness. When I didn't reply, they turned to venom, accusing me of betrayal, of ruining his life. I kept them all in a locked drawer, not out of sentiment, but as reminders. Each page was proof of who he truly was, and why I had been right to walk away. I found new rituals in the quiet. Morning runs by the river, the air sharp and clean. Coffee brewed just for me, rich and safe, its steam curling like a promise of new beginnings. Dinners with friends who made me laugh until my ribs ached. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged to myself. Yet even in peace, the question sometimes lingered, why me? Why had the people closest to me chosen envy and cruelty over love? Some nights, the question twisted like a knife. But over time, I realized the answer didn't matter. What mattered was that I had seen the truth. I faced it, and walked out alive. One Saturday morning, I stood on my balcony watching the city wake. The sun spilled gold across the rooftops, and I thought about everything I had lost: my marriage, my illusion, my old sense of safety. But I also thought about what I had gained: strength, clarity, freedom. Betrayal had nearly broken me, but in the ashes, I found a version of myself I never knew existed. One who was unafraid to speak, unafraid to fight, unafraid to leave behind those who thrived on my silence. So here I am, telling you my story. Not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. Because somewhere out there is someone sipping from a poisoned cup, not literal, maybe, but emotional, spiritual, and they need to know they don't have to swallow it. They need to know they can put it down, walk away, and survive. If you've listened this far, if my journey has touched something in you, I ask only this: share it. Share it so someone else can find their strength. Like this video if you believe survival is worth celebrating. Subscribe for more stories of resilience, and leave a comment telling me, what have you walked away from? And how did it set you free? Because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't poison or punishment. It's living. Truly living.